Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So, as promised, going to give my review for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, the latest Marvel film. Said before, this is going to be my next movie review, so let's get to it. So I literally just saw this movie like maybe an hour ago, so I wanted to talk about it while it was still fresh in my mind. So first and foremost, just kind of get some details about the movie out of the way. Film was directed by Peyton Reed, who also directed the other Ant-Man films. Written by Jeff Loveness, who also wrote for a few seasons of Rick and Morty from 2019 to 2022, which makes sense given the multiverse subject matter of the movie and the latest, the most recent films in the MCU. Cinematography by Bill Pope, who also worked on Alita Battle Angel and Shang-Chi, so this appears to be Bill's second movie in the MCU. Musical score done by Christoph Beck, who also did musical work for the other Ant-Man films. He also worked on other MCU projects such as WandaVision and Hawkeye, so not their first foray into the MCU. Film stars Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, Evangeline Lilly as Wasp, Jonathan Majors in the movie as Kang the Conqueror, Catherine Newton as Cassie Lang, Ant-Man's daughter, Michelle Pfeiffer, who shows up in this, as Janet Van Dyne, and Michael Douglas as Hank Pym. So, just going to go over the story just briefly. So, after the events of Endgame, Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, is living a successful life as both an Avenger and a book writer in a pretty comedic scene in the movie. His daughter Cassie, however, seems to be having some problems, especially with the law, much like her father in the first movie. But she also appears to be a science and tech whiz. She reveals that she's been working on a device that can actually send signals to the quantum realm, a subatomic universe introduced in earlier films that appears to exist outside of time and space. This turns out to be bad news, however, go figure, as Janet, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, reveals that the machine that made the quantum realm is actually bad news and tells him to shut down the machine. It's too late, however, and Scott, Hope, Cassie, Janet, and Hank Pym are all sucked into the quantum realm. There they discover a strange world full of bizarre and interesting people and creatures. Within this new realm, however, they also discover a sinister person from Janet's past, Kang the Conqueror, who has a score to settle with her for stranding him there before. He also reveals an even greater threat that may be waiting for the Avengers down the road. In this movie, it's up to Ant-Man and his family to protect both the quantum realm and their universe by stopping Kang's evil plans. So, full disclosure, I did not see the second Ant-Man film. I know it got some pretty mixed reviews, mixed to bad reviews from what I heard. A lot of my friends were not fans of it. I did see the first one, though, and I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was very inventive and imaginative. I liked the idea of Ant-Man shrinking down, but still retaining a lot of his strength, so he can hit things hard, almost like a bullet. And it led to some really interesting and funny moments in that movie. Some inventive moments, with his small size. I am familiar with the character. I know more about him from like the Avengers films and his different abilities that he's used in there. So, I am at least familiar with the character to an extent. So I didn't go into this movie completely blind, not knowing anything about Ant-Man and his previous escapades in the MCU. So I'm just going to give my brief thoughts on this before I kind of go into more details of what I thought about this movie. So I've been seeing a lot of negative press for this film, and I think it seems almost like a lot of people have gone into this movie almost wanting to hate it. I don't really quite understand why. It seems like most of the stuff I've seen like on YouTube has been mostly negative criticism of it, and I really wanted to go into this movie and give it a fair try. I didn't want to do, what do they call that, the quote-unquote hate watching or something, where you view a show or program with the intention of just crapping all over it later. I really didn't want to do that with this film. I wanted to give it a fair chance, to go into it blind, knowing as little as possible, except for, some of the spoilers I got from just some reviews I had seen. But I didn't know a whole lot about this, other than that Kang was going to be the villain for it. And yeah, of course, I think this goes without saying, it's going to be in the title, but spoilers from here on out. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want any of the plot spoiled for you, here's your warning. But anyways, yeah, I would just say overall, my thoughts on this film are, it's fine. I didn't hate it. I didn't particularly love it. I'm not really a huge MCU fan, to be honest with you. I like the movies. I really enjoyed Endgame and a lot of the Iron Man films, and Captain America as well. But overall, I mean, I'm not a gigantic MCU fan. But this movie, I think, it's a generic MCU film. It pretty much follows the same formula that a lot of Marvel movies have in the past. You know, whether that's a good or a bad thing kind of depends on, I guess, how big of a fan you are of the franchise. So, but I would say overall, I liked this movie fine. It didn't really do anything to wow me, but it entertained me for about an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. So, in that regard, I guess I liked it for the most part. So I guess I'll just kind of talk about just some of the things I liked about it and some of the things that I was not particularly crazy about. So let's go over the good stuff first. The acting. First and foremost, Paul Rudd. Yeah, he's the typical charming Paul Rudd that we all know and love. He plays the character of Scott very well. I think he's got a lot of good moments in this film. He hits the emotional beats, I think, as good as he can. I mean, I don't have a problem with Paul Rudd. I just feel like he's more of a comedic actor. I think he can deliver the more serious moments when he needs to, especially in films like this. But sometimes there's moments where I feel like he's supposed to give a little bit more emotion, and I don't know if he can quite hit that. It's not because I don't think he's an actor who can do it. I just feel like it's just not something that... I don't think that's his strength. I think he really is best suited for, like, roles kind of like this, where he's more of a comedic role and not so much a serious role. I do think that he does play the role of Scott Lang very well in this, and he plays off all the other characters, including the actress who plays his daughter, Catherine Newton, very well. But the other standout performance in this movie that I really liked was Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror. So I know he was in the show, I think it's Lovecraft Country on HBO Max. I think that was the show that kind of really got him skyrocketed into stardom. But man, lately he's been in a lot of movies. I know he played He Who Remains in the Loki series, which is basically a variant of Kang, and a very different version of Kang from this one too. In that one, he was definitely much more silly, I guess, more comedic, and in this movie, he's definitely much more serious. He almost has a sort of a Shakespearean portrayal of the character, which I think he said was part of his inspiration for preparing for the role. And in my opinion, he's easily the best part of the film. Every scene that he's in, where the focus is on Kang, I think is definitely the strongest part of the movie. Seems to be a trend with the Marvel films where the villain is like the most interesting character. Like you had, I think it was Killmonger from the first Black Panther film, and then of course Thanos from Infinity War. Like, it just feels like the villains are always the most interesting. And as if on cue, the dogs next door are barking. Well, sorry, unfortunately, I have the noise gate on, so hopefully the microphone is drowning out the barks, but if it's not, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. But regardless, yes, I do think Kang is probably the best part of this film. His role in the movie is definitely interesting. I like he doesn't actually technically have powers, it's his technology that he uses, but I like his design. I like the way they make him look. He actually looks quite a bit like how he does in the comics. I kind of did like the comparison to see like how they captured the look of him, and they did a pretty good job for the most part. Like his suit, the way his mask, his helmet has like that blue kind of light that comes over his face and stuff, and also like the scars on his face. They did a really good job of making him look like his comic book version, but not make him look too comic booky, if you know what I mean. Like sometimes when you make a character look too much how they do in the comics, they almost kind of look like ridiculous. But they did a good job of making him look pretty much like how he does in the comic version, but also making him look, like cool and realistic and also threatening too. Another positive of the movie, I liked the world and character designs. I like the quantum realm. I like how it looks. Again, kind of going along with the multiverse look. It's interesting. It's definitely different too. Like I like the different creature designs that are in this movie. Like there's creatures that are supposed to be like horses, and they're almost like slug horses. Like they have like the heads of slugs and stuff like that. That was kind of cool. There's a lot of little stuff in this movie that I kind of found myself noticing while watching it. I'm definitely going to have to watch this a second time to see if there's stuff that I missed. I'm sure there's plenty that I did. But just the creatures they run into, like there's this little slug creature that like they have to drink his juice so they can understand the language and stuff. And it's like, it's disgusting, but it's also funny. And like he's obsessed with like holes and stuff, and it leads to a lot of really funny comedic moments. Like I like the world that this takes place in. The quantum realm was really interesting. I do wish they could have taken more time to explore it, though. I think that would have been cool. But another bonus of this movie, and this is probably not going to be a big surprise, the action sequences. There's some pretty cool action and fight scenes in this movie. There's a lot of big gunfights. You see plenty of moments where there's small armies going at it and fighting each other. And in that regard, it kind of felt like there was some hints of Star Wars in this. I definitely got some Star Wars vibes watching this movie, which I'm not going to chalk that up as a good or bad thing. It was just something that I noticed. Like, there's definitely moments where you see characters using like what look like laser guns to shoot each other, like phasers. And just, I don't know, it kind of gave me vibes of like the stormtroopers from the Star Wars films trying to fight the rebels. I kind of got a lot of that in this movie. And it also doesn't help that, Ant-Man and his daughter are teaming up with a bunch of people who are basically like refugees trying to escape from Kang because he destroyed their worlds and they ended up in the quantum realm. So yeah, when you see them going up against his empire that he's basically created, it's hard to not get vibes of like the Empire from Star Wars. And since Disney owns both MCU and Star Wars, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, the different action sequences were cool. I liked the different tech that you see in this movie. Like I like the minions that Kang has. They have like those helmets on their heads, and like it's kind of weird. Like they almost seem like they're made of like this weird like goop stuff, because every time somebody kills them, they kind of just like explode. And I don't know, that's kind of interesting. I like the technology there. Like Kang's technology was really interesting to look at. I like the different technology that you see. Like there's scenes with like these highly advanced ants and the technology they use. It's like ant technology that's later in the film, and that's really cool to look at. There's a lot of that in this film, for sure. But now we'll talk about some of the negatives of this movie. And unfortunately for me, I do think the negatives I don't know if they outweigh the positives, but they were definitely, I would say they were about even for me. But as far as some of the negatives, several characters in this movie just felt kind of pointless. So there is a cameo in this film, and I feel like this is becoming pretty common in Marvel films now. They always have to have that big name celebrity cameo. And it's usually kind of an older celebrity too. Like you had Jeff Goldblum in Thor Ragnarok. You had Glenn Close in the very first Guardians of the Galaxy film, which those cameos they were fine, and they were actually kind of fun and interesting. Like Jeff Goldblum was kind of fun. He's a weird ass dude, but it was kind of fun seeing him in Ragnarok. Like it seemed like he was having fun with the part, so it was, it worked. In this movie, they have Bill Murray, and he's Bill Murray. And I don't know, it just felt like, why is he here? I didn't quite understand the point of his character. Like, I mean, I understand his part in the story, but it really felt pointless having him in there, other than just to be like, oh, hey, look, it's Bill Murray in our movie. So he felt pointless. I didn't really see why he was in there. Also, Hope's character in general, played by Evangeline Lilly, she really felt like a serious side character in this movie, and considering the title of the film is Ant-Man and the Wasp, that was kind of surprising. Yeah, like she's got decent enough screen time, and you do get to see her have some interaction with Janet, with her mom, but overall, she just didn't feel like she didn't feel like she made that much of a difference in the film. There's some moments where she does help out, like in the action sequences, like when they're trying to fight Kang, but I just didn't really feel like she had much of a part in this movie. So that was very surprising, especially since she felt like she had a much bigger role in the first one, and I didn't see the second one, so I can't really speak to that one. Another thing that I was kind of disappointed in with this film, and this is something that might disappoint a lot of other people too, is that a lot of the other characters, like Michael Pena, hope I'm saying his name right, from the previous Ant-Man film, he's not in this movie at all, which that was disappointing for me. I mean, he was one of the best parts of the first Ant-Man movie, the way he would recap stuff, and it was always it made for a great comedic moment. Like, it was really funny, and it played to his character very well. And he's not even in this movie at all. Like, he doesn't even have a cameo, and that was disappointing. And I think in that sense, this felt less like an Ant-Man film, and it felt more like a very small-scale Avengers film. Just because, yes, Ant-Man's in it, but it's kind of setting up for more Avengers films to come down the road. So it almost kind of felt like this should have been called Avengers, Ant-Man in the Quantum Realm, or something like that. I think that would have been a much more appropriate title for this movie instead of Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. The title's a little misleading in that regard. Another negative aspect of this film is that while the movie is interesting in some respects, as a starting point to Phase 5 and starting off the Kang Dynasty saga, this really felt underwhelming. Again, like, Kang he's good. He's played very well by Majors. He's a good, interesting, compelling character, and I was genuinely interested in finding out more about him. And you kind of get hints of like what is going on behind his character in this film, but again, like, as a starting point for Phase 5, this just really didn't get me that hyped up for future films in the series. throughout, like, I remember in the first Avengers film, they introduced Thanos at the very end of the first Avengers film. And of course, back then that was, what, 2012 or something? Like over 10 years ago, which is depressing to think about. But when they show Thanos at the very end of that movie, and all you see is you just see that profile shot of his face as he smiles into the camera, and his minion says to fight the Avengers is to court death, and then it just fades to black. And the rest of the films are basically setting up to the big confrontation with him. Like, we had a decade, basically, of looking forward to that villain, and they kept building him up. Admittedly, maybe they could have sprinkled in a little bit more about Thanos in the individual films, so we could have gotten a better idea of who he was, but still, it didn't change the fact that the hype was real. We knew that this guy was a big deal. We knew he was a threat. Even if you didn't read the comics, you knew this guy was going to be a serious threat. If Hulk and Thor and Captain America and Iron Man and whoever else was going to be in the Avengers are all going to have to team up to take this guy down, then you know this dude is not screwing around. This dude's a badass. And with Kang, even though he's played very well, very admirably by Majors, I don't know. I felt like he lacked that threat that Thanos has. And maybe that's something they're going to fix in future installments. I'm not sure. But I just feel like since he is supposed to be billed as the next big villain of the MCU, I just feel like it feels like he doesn't quite have that yet. But, there is an after credits scene, and I'll just go ahead and spoil that now. We do get introduced to the Council of Kangs in this film, which is basically like it sounds. It's an endless army of Kangs, led by 3 of them who, I think it's Centurion, something else. I'll have to look that up. I can't remember. There's like 3 Kangs that are essentially leading this, the Council of Kangs. And we do get a glimpse of that. So the idea that there is like an endless army of Kangs that could be coming up against the Avengers, each one with the same technology that this one had, that I think could be interesting. And I think that could definitely set him up as a serious threat to the Avengers. But the Kang that we got in this movie, I mean, I guess as just one of, an endless army of Kangs, I guess he was pretty threatening. But I don't know, he's supposed to be the next big villain, and I just didn't get that vibe from him. He felt more like just another movie villain, not a saga villain, if that makes sense. But yeah, in that sense, I think this felt somewhat underwhelming. I don't think this was a terrible start to Phase 5, but I think they definitely could have done a lot better to get me hyped up for this. I'm just going to look this up real quick. Council of Kangs. I just want to see who their members are and who the 3 were that they introduced. Okay, yeah, it was Ramatut, Immortus, and the Centurion, or Scarlet Centurion. Those are the 3 they introduced in this film. And apparently the shot of the Kangs, cheering in triumph, apparently is actually a panel from the comics, from the Marvel comics. So that was cool that they recreated this for this film. That was actually really cool. And of course, they're all played by Jonathan Majors too, and he kind of tries to give each one their own unique personality. So that was cool. I mean, it had to be interesting for him to do that as well, to play these different characters. That had to be kind of fun for him as an actor, I would think. But yeah, another negative aspect of this film is the CGI. It doesn't look the best in some scenes. Overall, I think it works, but it's, I don't know, it's not, there's definitely some scenes where it definitely looks not the best. I think I read somewhere that this film was done in the same studio that made, I don't remember the name of the studio, but it's the same studio they used to film The Mandalorian. So it's kind of a smaller set with like green screen set up. There's definitely some moments in this film where it definitely looks like the actors are standing in front of a green screen. I mean, I think you kind of come to expect that from most Marvel films anymore. It's just actors just pretending like they're talking to somebody, and but in real life, there's probably nothing around them. But yeah, there's definitely moments in this film where the backdrop of the quantum realm behind, Paul Rudd, it's like, okay, Paul Rudd is clearly there, and the rest of it is not. But I didn't mind that too much. What I did mind was when they introduced one character in this film, and I didn't reveal his name earlier for the sake of spoilers, but that was the character of MODOK. And I can't remember what the acronym stands for. It's like machine something, I can't remember, designed for nothing other than killing or something like that, only for killing. I can't remember what it's called, but I'm going to look that up now. And I'm actually kind of curious because I totally butchered that. Let's see, what does MODOK stand for? But anyways, while I'm looking that up, I'll just talk about that real quick. So MODOK is played by Corey Stoll. And for those of you who may not remember him, he played Yellow Jacket. He was the main villain from the first Ant-Man film. See, he is MODOK in this film. Apparently, when he got shrunk down in the first film, he got shrunk all the way down to the quantum realm, and basically he's just a floating head in this. And his head has been enlarged, and he's on that little floating platform so he can fly around and basically try to kill people. So yeah, that's who MODOK is in this movie. I think they should have just left his helmet on. I don't think they should have ever revealed his face. Because when they do, wow. I mean, I'm not a very harsh critic, honestly. Like, I usually give movies a pass for most stuff, but man, the effects on his face do not look good. I feel like they really should have just either tried to make him look really ugly or like just CG his entire face and make it look like something completely different. But man, like he does not look good at all. It basically looks like they took his face and just kind of stretched it over a large body. And it does not look good, in my opinion. Okay, mental organism designed only for killing. That's it, yeah. And that's actually kind of a joke in the movie because it should have been MODOK because of the F. But yeah, okay, that's what it stood for. I knew it was something like designed only for killing, but I couldn't remember what the MO stood for. But yeah, the special effects on him do not look good at all. Like, I really try to defend most films in these types of situations, but yeah, that was not good. To quote He Who Remains from the Loki series, swing and a miss there. But yeah, that's another negative for this movie. Another negative aspect I just want to bring up too is some things in this movie just really kind of bothered me in terms of like the fact that they didn't really make sense. I know for most films, especially in the MCU, you have to really suspend your disbelief, but man, it's like, okay, first of all, in this movie, Janet's character, so she knew about Kang. She reveals that pretty early on, and she didn't tell anybody. Like, she knew who he was, and she had a pretty good idea of what he was trying to do. Like, she helps him repair his ship because she doesn't know who he is, and then she accidentally touches his ship when it's powered up, and she can see, like, his memory, because I guess it's hooked up to his mind, which is a weird thing for a ship to do, but she can see that he's destroyed other realities and killed just countless lives. And so she gets back from the quantum realm and she doesn't tell anybody about him. That'd be like the very first freaking thing I would say, like, hey, there's a maniac down there named Kang. We got to stop him. We got to make sure he can't get out of there because that dude's going to kill us all. Like, that was kind of hard to believe. Also, and then at the end of the film, I mean, I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but of course, Ant-Man, they do defeat Kang, but then Scott gets back and then he doesn't tell anybody about him. I mean, Scott, of all people, should know to tell people. He knows the Avengers. He knows the people who would probably be the most likely to be able to stop Kang. And especially since, he doesn't know this, but like Doctor Strange, who's traveled the multiverse, that would be somebody who I think could definitely sympathize with that. That would be somebody that would want to know about that for sure. Another part of this movie that I really had a problem with too is the fact that Ant-Man is able to defeat him. And Kang even says in this movie at one point that he's defeated the Avengers. He asks Scott at one point in the movie, like, are you the one with the hammer? In other words, implying that he has fought Thor and defeated him. And Ant-Man, who really is not one of the more powerful Avengers, I mean, he has his moments, but he can't go toe-to-toe with, like, Thor or Hulk or Doctor Strange. I mean, these are guys that would just tear him apart, quite literally in some cases. And, like, I guess just the idea that he was able to defeat Kang in this film, that didn't make sense to me. This guy is supposed to be the big baddie, the next big major villain of the MCU, and the idea that, and I'm not trying to insult Ant-Man or his character or anything like that. I actually like his character quite a bit. I think in terms of powers, he actually has some of the more interesting ones that I've seen in the MCU so far. But just the idea that he would be the one who could go toe-to-toe with Kang, even if it is just one variant of Kang, just seems really far-fetched to me. So yeah, and there's other stuff like that in this movie too that you really have to suspend your disbelief for. But yeah, those were two big things that really kind of stood out to me. Like, why wouldn't you tell people about this guy? You got out of there, you barely escaped by the skin of your teeth, and you're really not going to try to warn people about him? Even if he is dead, it's like, there's other variants of him out there because he told you that. And for all you know, and he even said, like, the other variants are just as bad as he is, if not worse. So why wouldn't you tell the Avengers about that? This really seems like something they would want to know about. But who knows? But yeah, as far as like the negatives go, I would say those are the ones that really kind of stuck out to me. So as far as like my overall thoughts in this film, I would say Quantumania is a typical Marvel film, for better and worse. This movie pretty much checks all the boxes you'd expect from the MCU. big action sequences, big name celebrity cameos that don't always work, overabundance of comedy and one-liners. There's quite a bit of that in this movie. It is thankfully kept to a relative minimum, I think, for the most part. It doesn't overstay its welcome. They don't overuse it too much in most scenes. There's a lot of CGI, a lot of green screen usage in this movie, and of course, an interesting villain with grandiose plans for conquest. Despite being the starting point for Phase 5 in the MCU and to being used to set up the next saga and the big villain to follow Thanos, this film felt more like just another generic superhero film with hints of Star Wars sprinkled in. The saving grace of this film, at least in my opinion, is Jonathan Majors as Kang. Majors really tries to bring a lot of intensity and menace to the character, and I think he greatly succeeds for the most part. He's threatening pretty much from the first moment he walks on screen and faces Scott. Honestly, I think if the film had focused more on Kang and his conflict with Scott and Janet, I think this would have been a better movie. Whenever the film, went away from those or moved away from those moments to focus on other characters like Cassie, it felt like it lost some of its momentum. And while I don't think this movie deserves all the hate it's been getting, I do understand a lot of the criticism out there. As it is, I think this movie is just kind of okay. With the exception of the villain, there's really not much here that's going to blow you away. If you enjoy the Marvel formula, you'll probably enjoy this fine. If you're looking for something else, however, this will likely disappoint you. It has me interested for what's to come in the MCU, but not overly excited. And that is pretty much my opinion of the movie. But what did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Do you disagree with me? Or, did you think this was one of the worst movies in the MCU? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below on YouTube. I think that's going to conclude my episode for today, everybody. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.